From the Marquee Media Studio inside Mark Tank, it's the Mark Haney Show.
Yes, this is the Mark Haney Show, and we are on a mission to ignite the entrepreneurial revolution right here in the hometown we love. And we do that by sharing stories of winning, sharing stories of the process of getting to the win. And today, that is what we are going to be doing. Shweta Gandhi is here on the show today, and she is the co-founder and CEO of Strivedios. We're going to find out about her company, but every company, I think every person needs to figure out a way to create an advantage. And, we're doing that here on the Mark Haney Show. And with the Growth Factory, we're building the backyard advantage. It's the most connected community in the world for local entrepreneurs. And it's based around this culture of love, right? Helping one another to succeed. And so part of sharing the stories is we are helping you as you get to know Shweta and her story. We're hoping that that's helpful, that you can gain a nugget or two, because everybody needs an advantage. So Shweta, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we want to get to know you. Maybe if you don't mind, give us a little bit of your background and how you became an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I started my career in corporate finance, very different from what I'm doing today. But I was part of a really interesting program at AT&T where they were looking to build out their mid-management. They had about 60% of their staff were baby boomers. And so they were looking to build this aggressive program where they brought young college grads and took us through a rotational program where we had every year increasingly additional, managerial roles that we had took on. So I started my first job out of college. I was managing a team of 20 union reps most of whom were at the company double the amount of time I've been alive.
So you got to come in as the new boss.
The new boss. I learned very quickly that I was there to learn, and if there was in the process anything I can give back, that's a cherry on the top. But they were lovely. And it was a really great way about just to jump into the fire and really understand what it means to work with a team and be supportive and listen and constantly be, thinking about all the things that we can do to help. And then from there, it was increasingly more responsibility. We were then, my next year, I was managing a team of managers. Third year was 100 reps that we were managing at 24 in a call center. And then eventually you ended up doing what you came in to do, which was corporate finance. And then during that process, I very quickly figured out that I didn't want to be in corporate. And
well, that's interesting to me because so we know that entrepreneurship there's a lot of risk associated with it. There can be a lot of stress. And you've got a great job. So, but okay, walk me through. So you got this great job. I'm sure you're making great money. You're managing managers for a large corporation, and you knew you didn't want to do that, which is interesting to have that epiphany, because when stuff is going well, sometimes it's tough to want to make a change.
Well, and I think especially I come from a family where my dad was, a first generation immigrant. And I was first generation. My dad immigrated when he was in his mid 20s. Worked a very, blue collar job where every, dollar raised mattered a lot. And we're a family of 5 children and they worked extremely hard. And so when I had this opportunity to continue to grow in a fairly secure manner, and then went home and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So what ultimately led me to not wanting to do it is I recognized that I was kind of part of this machine that I didn't really necessarily feel passionate about. I started looking around. I ended up meeting a foundation, a fellow on a foundation that they wanted to shut down their foundation. They wanted to put the money in education in India particularly. And I was like, that's interesting. And then as I got more into it, it really spoke to me in a way that my corporate work didn't. And I ended up deciding to quit my job, and we ran the nonprofit. I was running it for a few years in Chicago. Loved the entrepreneurial experience, but also had this benefit of a foundation that was supporting us, that we were well funded, which was very interesting for most nonprofits at that point. And I was like, I could do this. I wasn't paying myself for it. I was getting paid by my day job. And then but I knew it spoke to me in a different way. And so I was like, I'm going to move to India. And my parents were like, why?
India. Is that where your parents were from, or your
They're
dad
from
was
India.
from? Okay,
Yeah.
you were moving to the homeland.
The homeland. And they had come here and they like built a life for us here, which was lovely. My job at the time, AT&T, had a big presence in India. And they were like, you can move to India and keep your job.
Oh.
And I was like, no. And that part was probably the hardest for particularly my dad was like, why? Like, you can keep this security. And I was like, no, I'm sure that's not what I want to do anymore. And I want to go explore this. And worst case, I come back and, I find something better. And so I packed my bag. I'm not a good packer. So I was like, I'm going to live in one bag. And I did for a year. And I went and I explored the world of nonprofits in India and ended up staying there for 5 years and got married while I was there.
That sounds scary, though, not getting married, but like moving there as a single woman. And had you been to India before, though?
I had been, but not in the capacity. Like, I'd been with my parents, with my sisters to visit family, and we'd largely go for like 3 months in the summer and like just be with cousins, which was lovely. But I went, and I had gone like as an adult for a couple months to do nonprofit work before I decided to move there. But to go as like an adult and like choose where I was going to live, which was not where my family was from, start a company. At the time, didn't actually, like, now in hindsight, if I had a kid doing that, I'd be like, oh, what are you doing? But at the time, just felt right. Like, it felt like what I wanted to do. I was excited about it. And I was relentless on figuring it out.
And you learned the education space in that capacity.
Yeah.
And your new business is in the education. So you took some of the learnings, obviously.
Absolutely.
So tell us about the decision to start Strive.io. Is it called Strive.io or Strive.io?
You know what? The jury's out. We're figuring it out. So we'll go with Strive.io. So post my life in India, I came back when we were having my daughter, and I first time since I was 16, took a year off to be with her. She had some medical things, and that gave me a real good opportunity to really reflect and think back onto, like, what do I really want to do going forward? I had kind of closed up shop in the work that I was doing in India. And I started, and at that point I was like, you know what, I think down the road, I'd love to start a school. But I had never been an educator before. I'd been working in education for a long time. And I was like, I probably should go figure out what that means. So I connected with the CEO of this charter that was based out of San Jose. They sort of created a role for me, which was managing their innovation work. I was like, I want a 9-to-4 job, and I want to come home to my kid. No, I don't want a team. I don't want anything. And they were like, okay. And like 2 months in, I had a team. And very quickly that pivoted into me building a platform for them. And eventually we sold that platform externally. But they ultimately decided they wanted to keep it in-house. And that's when I was like, well, I think we've got something here and I'd love to go explore it. And I ended up transitioning out of the charter after about 5 years in 2022, end of 2022, beginning of 2023. Took about 6 months to really like get out of my echo chamber. My team came along with me that was working on our project internal to this charter. And then we interviewed a bunch of teachers, a bunch of administrators, really tried to like assess the problem that we thought was in our industry, get some good feedback, and we kicked off in April of 2023.
Brand new company, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but you just won recently the King's Capitalize contest, which has got all kinds of great companies applying to get in there, and then you narrows down to like the final four. And you guys actually won it. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk about the problem that you're solving in the education space, because there's a few problems in education, and you got to pick one, I guess, if you want to be successful in entrepreneurship and kind of hone in. So what is it that you're solving?
Yeah. So the way I'll kind of walk you to how I came about the problem.
Okay.
So when I was at my charter, a lot of my work ended up, this charter was very ed tech friendly. So they used a lot of interesting ed tech tools, but a lot of the ed tech work was happening in a silo. And so the tool that we built internally and it often wasn't happening with Fidelity. And so we ended up building a tool that was a goals-based platform for kids to say, hey, if you have access to these tools, if you use them with Fidelity, then we can start measuring efficacy of whether they're working or not. In the process of measuring the efficacy, I started looking at a lot of data. And I was like, oh, there's a lot of interesting nuggets here within this data. But also realized that 96% of schools don't use ed tech in the way that this particular district did. But
right, so you're measuring at that time, what, test scores and things like that?
It wasn't test scores. So it's all like supplemental ed tech products. So for example, you go and you take a test, you get your tier 1, like whole class instruction, and often to get at-bats practice, this school would use ed tech products. So at-bats, math practice or reading practice or phonics practice. And we take all that data and started making sense of that data so that we can then share that back with teachers.
Okay, so you're helping the teacher directly is sort of who the person whose life is changing is their job is getting, I guess, either easier or they're able to focus their time into other areas besides crunching data.
Absolutely. And often they don't have the capacity to do that themselves anyways. And so what's happening is it's often not happening. And there's a lot of decisions that are being made based on anecdotal data, which I'm not disregarding the importance of that data, but I also know that in 2024, we can do a better job supporting our teachers and making sure that we're not just taking ed tech data, but we're taking that assessment data, behavior data into account. We're taking social emotional data, all of those different pieces and building out these sort of profiles for kids to say, okay, here's where kids are struggling and here's what they've mastered.
Okay, so let me just, let's say my son's going to a school that is using your product and he is, he normally gets ranked by his school teacher and you get a report card and that kind of thing. What, based upon, I guess, observation and you say anecdotal data, that would be like what? Whether he's disruptive in class and stuff like that?
No, it'll be things like...
Because he is disruptive. He's 36 now. He's really disruptive.
He's really disruptive. Hopefully, probably in a good way is my guess. No, it goes beyond just that. So there are the classroom observations, but also there's things like, for example, I talked to my kid's first grade teacher last year and I said, how do you use data? And she said, well, I give kids these things called what we call exit ticket in the industry. So they're usually 3 to 5 questions after she teaches a lesson. They're usually pretty quick hits and they essentially assess whether a kid understands a skill or not.
Oh,
and she
okay.
says,
kind of like a little mini test?
A mini quiz, for lack of a better word. And she says, I put it in 3 piles, didn't get it on track above, above track.
Okay.
And I then make my decision on what I'm going to do the next day. And again, I'm not discounting that method. I think that's perfectly fine. And she's a lovely teacher. My daughter grew a lot in first grade and it's wonderful. And for me, there's a lot of learning there too about like, okay, what did you do differently? Besides that, what else were you doing as you were thinking about supporting these kids? Now, what we're saying is hey, but if we took all that data, like took that like quiz data, overlay.
So they would still do those little quizzes.
Yep. We pulled that data in, we overlaid it with like other assessment data, with grades, with assignments. And oh, by the way, like we also overlaid that with things like behavior.
Okay.
Or like how they're like attendance, things like that, right? Oftentimes when a kid's struggling, it's not just solely because they don't understand a concept. There's other things that like fit into why or why not a kid may master a certain concept. And we're bringing that all together and saying like, if we put this information in front of you, how might that shift how you think about your day-to-day planning, how you think about your small groups, how you think about your independent work that kids are working on. And that's where we're kind of headed. We're saying like, okay, when we pull all this information together, how does that shift instruction?
And that information from the quizzes, that gets like manually input by the teacher? Is that how that works?
No, it's a work in progress. Oftentimes everything that we pull is digital because what we don't want is that teachers are like manually, like we're not adding to their already overburdened day. And so part of what we're figuring out actually is to get to like some of the granular student level, skill level data is often still not digitized. And so we're bringing in partners now. I think we talked about this before. We're bringing in partners who have access to that data and try to pull that data in directly through them.
Okay, so you've got the quizzes, you've got the behavior problem of my son, but he's a great student. You've got his attendance, which is perfect. What else is coming into this formula?
Any kind of like, say, ed tech data, if they're working on any kind of ed tech solutions.
Okay.
Any kind of assignments that we can get access to, homework.
Okay.
And we're building out our next layer. We're running a pilot this summer with a group out in Chicago where we're even overlaying curriculum. And so if we now have access to the student level data and how they're doing on these different skills, we overlay that to the curriculum and the scope and sequence for a school. We can now easily recommend to a teacher, hey, 5 kids are struggling on these skills. You already taught the lesson on this, but it's coming up again in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. How might you shift your lesson because you now know these 5 kids haven't met prereqs?
Gotcha. So what you put all this data in, and then the teacher gets recommendations on how to spend their time more effectively, potentially, and so that saves them time. Ultimately, does it save them time?
Ultimately, it saves them time. It makes their instruction more powerful. We're also not just focused on the teacher. So we kind of talk about it at the macro level, at the district level, where we make recommendations for district administrators on how they should be thinking about professional development, how they think about like financial resources and what they're renewing each year. So a bunch of things at the district level, obviously targeting teachers. And the goal is eventually to share that data with students as well and allow them to better then chart their course.
So everything as I think about a product like this, everything goes back to are the students doing better, right? They're the I guess the end customer, if you will, but the teachers, we need to have great teachers. And I remember growing up, there were certain teachers that sucked, and there was some that were fantastic and really made an impact on me and other students. And I sort of wonder if they have a little bit more time, they're going to have a little bit more time to make an impact, especially the great ones. So is part of this in measuring teacher performance to get them to do better, or is it predominantly to help them save time so they can make more of an impact?
That's a good question. And I think, Mark, transparently, the jury's out, right? Part of, like, for example, we get a lot of questions about, okay, what's the output? You gather all this data, you make these recommendations. What is the output? Is the output a lesson plan? Is the output a better, supplemental resources? What's the output? And part of what we're not trying to do is make sure that like we box our solution up so much so this early on to say like, this is what teachers need, right? And so right now we're at a point where we're early enough to say, okay, let's access all this data. Let's analyze it. Let's start making recommendations. Let's put that in front of our teachers and see how they then utilize those recommendations. And that might mean that they save time. That might mean they shift how they think about instruction. That might mean they shift how they do small groups. And it might save them time to then do more of the connection, right? Like one of the things we often hear about with AI is that like and there's a concern about this, right? Is that we're trying to replace, teachers or human beings for that matter in a multitude of industries, right? The beauty of those impactful teachers for you were less about what they taught you and more about how they connected to you, right?
Bet.
And so ultimately our goal is to say, how do we support these lovely teachers that are doing incredible work already just to make their jobs a little bit easier through saving time, through a better instruction, whatever it may be, allowing them to do what they do best, which is connecting with kids, understanding kids, being in a classroom and being able to be responsive to what they see on a child's face, or the fact that this kid was gone for the last 15 days or 10 days, 2 days, whatever, right? You're going to teach that kid very differently. You're going to approach that kid very differently. And only a teacher can really be the one to be in the driver's seat to make the decision on how to support those kids.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, to get into the mind of, let's say, the administrators or the school board or whoever the top people are in a school district, are you feeling like they're predominantly worried about, like, ultimately the number of people that, what's the positive outcome? Better test scores, more kids going to college? What kinds of things seem to be at the front of the leadership's mind?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is since COVID, we're dealing with two major issues. One is the largest learning loss we've ever seen in the history of like formalized education. And there's a lot of concern around how to like bridge that gap, both academically, but then also there's a lot of social emotional things going on here. And how do we support kids' mental well-being and make sure like they're interested in coming to school and so on and so forth. And the other bucket is just teacher retention in general. Teachers are overworked. We've had 300,000 teachers leave the industry since 2020. And they expect, as per McKinsey, about 900,000 more to leave the industry in the near future, which is, and I was saying this to someone, literally a state of emergency. Like we're literally in a state of emergency. Like we are on the cusp of losing some of the most important professionals literally in our country. And I'm not saying that because I'm in education. Like this is our future.
Important. Yeah, we trust our children, our most precious assets with, going to the school. That's why we, look around for the right schools and try to move into a neighborhood that's got a good school district and so on. And we're losing them. I knew there was an issue, but it sounds like it's, a horrific type issue.
It's terrible. And there are a lot of people that are working on trying to figure out what we can do to better support. And there's old age issues of they don't get paid well. There's long working hours. But then you're kind of like, okay, well, that's been going on for a long time. What changed, right? And to me, that's where the whole COVID world really shifted and really hurt our industry, where now teachers worked so hard to get us through that time and they are burnt out and tired. And the thing that they come to school for, which is impacting kids, supporting kids, has become much harder because kids are much further behind. I met a sixth grade lovely teacher in Oakland, and he said, I came into school this school year, and he said, my sixth graders were reading at levels kindergarten through fifth grade. And he said, Shweta, I don't even know where to begin. Like, I don't remember the learning blocks of like basic literacy, right? And he was like, and this is, tenured teacher, like, loves what he does. And he's struggling. And so to me, it was like, okay, I meet somebody like that. And I'm like, there are things I can't fix. But there are things where, like, at least with my background, my experience, what I've seen, we could potentially support, right? And we can help you get to a point where we're like, okay, this kid that's reading at, first or second grade level, what are the things we need to be thinking about? The other piece I'll say is oftentimes in education, we think about things as like a very black and white. You got an A or a B or a C or you got an F, right? Whereas actually it's such a continuum, right? It's like you master certain concepts and you don't. And so a lot of the hope for us with Strived is how do we think about mastery of concepts? How do we think about competency of concepts? So not only like, okay, you passed or failed, but really, did you understand that? And for everything that we know about you as an individual child, how do we make sure that we help you understand everything you've accomplished? And not everything you don't know, because that's not in a growth mindset perspective, but more of an asset-based mindset of like, okay, here's the next 5 things that make sense for you as an individual child.
Yeah. I wonder, as we were talking about the teacher shortage, the growing teacher shortage, do you think teachers feel less appreciated? I wonder if like COVID caused us to feel a little more distant, because we're doing Zoom calls and, Zoom training for our children. And maybe there's other things happening that are barriers to the relationship between the child and the teacher, or maybe the parent and the teacher, that really it just is not as rewarding as it was.
No. I'm not sure that we're appreciating them less, but I think that we're probably appreciating them the same. Oh. And it's much harder.
And we need to appreciate it more.
We need to appreciate more, right? And that things are only getting more difficult. There's something called ESSER funds that the government, the federally approved funds during the time of COVID, which are expiring this year. And like Mark, I sit in some of these conversations, even with my own kids' district. I sit on the site council, on the superintendent's committee, and it's grim. Like, this is like a call that the superintendent had a few months ago with parents and staff on a call. We just got our numbers down from the governor's office. They are painful, to say the least. And there was somebody I remember on the call who was like, are we expecting layoffs? And generally that's something you kind of punt on a call like that. And he was like, yeah. Like we're expecting layoffs, and we're going to do our best, of course, not to do that. But the reality is the numbers are grim, and we're going to have to, like, personnel is, more than 80% of our costs, and we're going to have to take a cut there. And
so we have a shortage of teachers, plus we're doing layoffs.
We're in a like a really scary time. And so it's all hands on deck.
Yeah. How political is this? Because I'm curious like the sales process. You're one of those people that can move molecules. I love when CEOs can cause molecules to move, can influence things. And there's a lot of people that are a little bit afraid of technology. The word artificial intelligence gets them, a little weirded out a little bit because it's scary and I'm not ready for it. And they're slower adopters, we'll call it. But thinking about the more forward-leaning districts, everybody needs to embrace technology. It's no matter what what line of work you're in, where it is here, it's upon us. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. What are you seeing in terms of like that acceptance factor? What kind of percentages of school districts and teachers are like saying thank you for helping us to do our job better, to gain more insight into how to do our job better, and some are a little more pushback and they're afraid because it's technology and it's scary and it's not the way we've always done it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think that when you go to a school district, forward thinking or not, generally they are receptive to you coming in, especially knowing that I've been in a district before. I was, at a charter for 5 years. I've been there, done that. I'm an operator. I speak their language. I understand their pain. That, by the way, cannot be underscored of for any entrepreneur, I would say, going into an industry that you genuinely understand and you felt the pain points yourself makes a world of a difference, especially when you're doing founder-led sales. And so when I go in and have a conversation with a district, I'm not saying, buy my AI tool. I'm saying, tell me your problems. And totally get that. And that happened. And it's a relationship-based dialogue we're having that's like, I got you, I was there, I'm not there now. And I'm genuinely interested in understanding where your problems are. So most of them will be great. I love having this conversation. You hear me, you understand me, you're trying to help me. That said, the resistance is less about, and again, it's a lot of this is messaging too of how I approach them, but where we get resistance is not so much about AI technology. Of course, there was concerns around data privacy and security and things like that, which we're very mindful of. But the resistance comes in more of a capacity space where they're listen, everything you said sounds lovely, but my head is below the water right now. Okay. And so yes, you're telling me low lift on my part, but even one more meeting on my calendar is going to put me under. And so you have to be really I think where we find success is when we have a champion that internal champion who's going to stick their neck out, have the conversations with the higher ups and the folks at the final mile. And that person's going to have to persist through. And so when you find one of those, you hold on to them as tight as possible and say, thank you a million times over, buy them some donuts because they're doing a lot.
Yeah. Well, you're such an early company. We're all in product development at some level. If you're in business, you're developing your product. But at this stage, you are doing a lot of listening, and you're really. How do you make the decision? Because you can't fix everything. You're going to hear problems from 17 different areas, and you've got to limit where you focus your resources to build out a product. You can't build out something that fixes everything. So how does talk and say this in a way that would help the CEO? I like how you framed it. If you're a CEO out there, think of it this way, because you're in the heart of it right now. How do you decide? How do you measure that and decide which ones you're going to attack?
Yeah.
Is it size of market?
It's a really hard question, and it's a really hard thing to get right. In fact, we're dealing with this right now where we started up our business model to go direct to districts, and we still absolutely do that. But we're finding a really interesting pivot where one thing we realized is that the granularity of data that we talked about earlier, districts just don't have that right now. And so we started pivoting towards talking to partners that do have access to that data and thinking about how we can overlay their very granular student level data with the district level data. And it became a really interesting space for us to play in. Now, as a product, a partner level product where you're saying, give me your data, let me overlay with district level data. And oh, by the way, let me make sure you have some sort of impact analysis of the product that you're putting out, some ROI of why these schools should buy you, is a very fundamentally different product than a front end of like a district administrator, a teacher, or a student using a product. So it's been a lot of...
So when you say a partner, now we're having somebody that's going into the sales process and helping specify the product, helping learn and listen, and you're helping influence, obviously, but the partners ultimately it's going to be their revenue. You're working through partners to drive your revenue. So that was sort of a pivot on what channel to go through, direct or through partners.
Yeah. And
how tough was that decision?
I think the decision made sense because ultimately that was data that was missing out of our like,
okay.
Like the
so
fundamental.
They provide a big piece of that data.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But what we have to be really cognizant of is getting so bespoke to each individual partner that we lose the ability to scale the product. I think we found a balance, where in early iterations of a brand new release of the product, we were going from beta to like getting really into market. I did a lot of like my own kind of, product, iterations in my mind. I happened to be at a conference a couple weeks ago and I randomly just like used the conference to be like, how do you get your information? How do you get what's your ideal way so I can think through, at least to whiteboard out a version of what I had in my head. Sent it over to my design team, who is lovely and does a way better job than I do, taking everything out of my head and putting it into a product. And now we're building really like low fidelity versions of that. And we'll put it out to our partners, we'll put it out to our teachers, and we'll get feedback, and we'll continue to remain nimble.
Awesome. So people listening, there's a lot of small businesses measure their success based upon revenue, and profitability kind of goes to the bottom line, or goes to it pays the bills. As a startup that either has low revenue or isn't making money yet, how do you measure your success at this stage?
I think there's a number of things. Is that one, our beta in its very early days, pre-beta, we had a prototype that was very like smoke and mirrors, and we had people willing to pay for that. And that was a measure of success for me to say, this is a real problem. Like the fact that people are willing to pay like for this vision, this thing that doesn't really work, and we kind of acted like it worked, was a really good indicator for us to say we've hit a real pain point. From there, we put out our beta in January. And we were talking about this earlier, we've been riding a high since. And it's been lovely because every administrator, every partner we talk to affirms, either through actual paid contracts or through at least some sort of commitment of sharing data or having further conversations, that this is something that they're ready to get on board with. And again, finicky beta.
So you're kind of like batting 1,000 on people saying, yes, we like you, we want to keep conversations rolling, we want to work together at some level.
And there's been plenty, by the way, that have said no, but there's been enough that have been like, we want to see this through. Right. And as your early like customers, we call them our early lighthouse customers, who are willing to bet on you by putting in actually money to make this happen. We got a small amount of funding from investors, which obviously is very helpful. And it, again, validates that we're on to something and that we're building out something that not only is just an interesting product, but can be a profitable product that can still drive impact. And we set ourselves up as a public benefits corp because impact is really important to me. My children's district will be using our product in 24-25. Doesn't get more real than that, than having my own kids use this product, and the pressure is on.
Okay, so what's a public benefits corp?
So it's still set up like from a tax perspective as a C corp, but it has a public benefit mission in mind.
Oh, right, yes. Okay, so that's got to feel great. You're riding the high right now. You won Kings Capitalize,
Yes.
the pitch event that the Growth Factory is a part of. In fact, I think I should come clean too. The Growth Factory made a small investment in Strived, and we're really excited. We bet mainly on founders as sort of the first thing that we look at is do we believe that this person's going to figure it out, especially in these early stage companies. There's going to be a lot of pivots, and in fact, every startup I've ever invested into or ever started, every company I've ever started has pivoted a lot at the beginning. So this is if you're hearing this is super normal to be pivoting and trying to figure it out. That's the beauty of it. And then when it gets going, now it can explode, and it can go real fast because it's a tech company. So it's very scalable. So now with that said, you won Kings Capitalize. Walk me through that experience. You ultimately pitched at some event, and then what happened?
Of all the things we've been a part of, it was definitely one of the most fun awards, and I got a lot of cool mom points, cool neighbor points, or
Nice.
all of the above. But yeah, it was lovely. So they set it up bracket style, and I think it was a couple over 100 companies that had applied. Went down to 16. We went through an interview process. From there, they chose 8 companies. We were invited to the Golden One Center, which was lovely. I had been there for like a Disney on Ice before, so never a game before. We got to go to their like lounge area. We did a whole pitch there, which in and of itself, like just even preparing and planning for that pitch was super valuable. And then they went on to four companies were invited to the game against the Pelicans, which we lost, but it was lovely. We were sitting in the owner's suite, and we got an opportunity to be on court and did like a 30-second video.
What was like when they call? So you get every progression in some of these things. It's like, oh, we advanced. You're excited. There's excitement, but you're at the game when you find out that you actually won.
I was literally, Mark, I was like, I was sure for some reason we weren't going to win. Like, I didn't think we'd lose.
Yeah.
But I didn't think we'd win. And I was there with my 5 and 7-year-old, and I was like, just having fun. Like, we're watching the game. My kids like ordering popcorn and ice cream, whatever, like I was like, this is awesome. And I'm like, we're just going to have a great time. And, at some point, they took us down before halftime to announce the winners. And even then, like, I
You're
literally
they're not taking 4 different companies down there, are they?
No, they took all 4 of us down.
Oh, they did take all 4.
They took all 4 to like announce the winners pre the check,
okay.
the check presentation, and they announced the 4th place. The 3rd place was the one that I was like, no, she's gonna get it. Like, she's got whatever. And then they announced her, and then they announced 2nd. And then obviously it was us. And I was still like, wait, really? Wait. And then like everyone else left, and my daughter was with me actually in the room, so we got a chance to go out on court and receive a check. And it was lovely. It was, the entire process was like a really exciting, really like humbled to have been the winner, and incredible companies. I had the opportunity to see the 8 that pitched and get to know some of those founders. And I mean, the beauty of Sacramento is there's some really lovely founders. I mean, we're newish to the area. We've been here about 3 years, and it's great. It's an incredible space to be.
Well, a number of them were growth factory companies, and so we were hoping one of our companies would,
Oh, we did.
Obviously, you represented well, so good job. So it's super exciting to see that, and you got to hand it to the Sacramento Kings. They're an innovative arena. A Golden One is super innovative, but they take their, I guess, community support for what's happening in and around Sacramento. To this really interesting way of helping tech startups, which is super cool.
And unheard of. Like, you don't, this is not normal. And in fact, the timing of it, what couldn't have been better, it was ahead of probably one of the biggest ed tech conferences that we have in a year. And people were like, you did what? Like the NBA did what? Like the Kings did what? Like it's not normal for a team like that to support so incredibly into their local ecosystem. And I think that we're lucky to have that.
Okay, so one of the last questions I'll ask you is like, what's the medium-term vision and maybe the long-term vision, but like also what are the obstacles that are sort of in front of you, in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. I think medium term, it's going to be really important for us, and maybe this is more short to medium term, is now we're finally in a space where we have a little bit of breathing room to really see a lot of our vision through, at least in this first phase, right? To your point, we'll probably still continue to pivot. But a lot of the things that I was doing when I was at the charter and within the last year finally is becoming possible through investment, through having access to some contracts. It's going to be really important for us to hit that out of the ballpark in terms of like really producing a product that's driving impact and like actually responding to the pain points that we say that we were going to respond to through the solution. Longer term, I think somebody said this to me at the conference, that data is not sexy. It's not a sexy thing to be like a data analyst. And it's something we don't think that much about. And so how do we, for our kiddos especially, how do we make data a part of everyday dialogue in a way that doesn't feel like shoved down your throat? And that's a thing. And that's at the macro state level, down to districts, down to, schools, to the very final mile, which is parents and kids, right? I don't know about you, your kids are older, but I got a glimpse into a very different world of learning during COVID, having my kids at home. I mean, they were so little, but I still got a really interesting glimpse. And as a parent with kids in like public elementary, I miss having that access and being able to really know how I can really go in and support. And so ultimately for myself, even in building out Strived, it's really important that we're able to make sure that we kind of hit all those different pieces in a way that's thoughtful and impactful.
That's awesome. Okay, so last question. Maybe just some words of, you've given some good advice and some wisdom for startup founders, but there's people that are actually earlier stage than you that would like to get to where you're at. Yeah. Any words of wisdom for that person? They've got all the ambition in the world, but they're just earlier.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. I think being an entrepreneur is a luxury. And I think people don't often think about it that way. But I think the fact that I could leave my last job, go into a very unknown space, take a leap of faith. I had my husband who was supporting us financially while I was doing that, and we used our savings. That's a luxury a lot of people unfortunately don't have. And so I feel very lucky that I was able to do that, and we made it through. And it wasn't easy by any means, but we did it. And we're fine. And we live in California, and that's crazy. And so I'd say, like, one, recognizing like how special that opportunity is, and for as long as you possibly can, building out your resilience so that you can continue to move forward, because there will be a lot more obstacles and a lot more no's along the way than yeses. But you've got to keep moving through. Like, if it's something you're really passionate about, which, like, do not start a company if you are not passionate about it. You'll figure it out. You'll figure out your way through, and there will be that village to support you. I mean, I think I connected with the Sacramento community a few months, like probably 6 months into starting Strived, and Mark, a whole new world, right? Like, just putting yourself out there, going to events, getting to know people, not for any ulterior motives outside of like, hey, there's like this thing, there's this backyard advantage, there's this whole ecosystem in Sacramento through the Carlson Center, through the folks at Startup Sac, just knowing that they were there, and they were supportive, and they were thinking about me, and they were reaching out when there was an opportunity. It's a very lonely journey to be an entrepreneur. And so the importance of what you're doing and bringing this ecosystem together, I think it's your guys' saying, like, you can't do it alone.
Yeah, nobody builds a truly great company alone.
No, and that's so, I mean, I say that even with like raising children, it always takes a village, and this is like a child. And like, if you don't reach out to help at least start connecting to that village, like, it's going to be much harder. And so I guess the word of wisdom is lean on your village, there are incredible people out there that want you to succeed, especially if you're doing good work. So lean on that, and that will help.
I love it. Thank you for coming on the show. Congratulations. I'm glad we are partners.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is really special, and we'll be obviously tracking you and hopefully continuing to share positive updates about how you're changing the world in education. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mark.
You bet.
Thanks for watching today's show. My goal for every episode is that you find a takeaway, something tangible you can use in your business today. And if you have a comment about a favorite takeaway, feel free to put it in in the box below. And if you have a topic that you'd like me to bring up on the show, don't forget to let me know. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to learn more about entrepreneurship. Because at Haney Biz, we are always by your side.